Hello, and welcome to Coffee with KBLIC. My name is Amber, and I'm a business and technology librarian at the Kirstein Business Library and Innovation Center at the Boston Public Library. Thanks for coming to Coffee with KBLIC. Today, I am joined by Vero Gonzalez and Margo De Torre from Wepa Translations. And today we're going to talk about language justice. And so we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what Coffee with KBLIC is and touch on some of the things that we have talked about previously. So last episode, we talked about how we can use maps to tell social stories. And continuing with that thread, we're going to talk about how language justice, or the lack thereof, impacts small businesses and how people can operate in their day-to-day. And Coffee with KBLIC is an opportunity for people to connect and chat about issues relating to their passion project, their small business, and things to basically build their communities together. So I have Margo De Torres, and we're also we have Vero Gonzalez, and we'll talk about language justice and more, as well as answer your questions. And so you can contact us by commenting in the live chat. You can also, if you have questions or research questions, you can email us at ask@bpl.org, and you can tweet at us at bplkirstein. I also have I'll also pull up the Wepa Translations website so you guys can get that contact information. So Vero and Margo, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Amber.
Thanks for having us, Amber.
So I wanted to thank you for joining me this morning, and I wanted to just have you say hello and sort of give us a brief introduction on who you are and some of the work that you guys do.
I'm Vero Gonzalez, and we're actually a mother-daughter interpretation and translation team. I'm going to run us through a little bit about what language justice is, and then I'll pass it to Margo, who can talk about specifically how it impacts small businesses. So at its core, language justice is the right we each have to speak in the language we are most comfortable in. At Wepa Translations, we recognize that our practice is limited as we can only provide Spanish interpretation and translation, and there are many other languages that are represented in our community. In our practice, we like to say that we recognize that language is a place of connection, but it's also a place of trauma, and recognize the fact that the cities where we live and work are in indigenous lands, and that colonization has erased thousands of languages. We also recognize the loss of languages due to slavery, and the fact that today, many of us do not speak the language of our ancestors.
Right.
Language justice is rooted in a history of resistance by communities and peoples whose voices have been silenced for generations. And to practice language justice is to focus on decolonization and a healing approach to language. Wepa is a cry of joy, an exclamation of joy in Puerto Rico. So we took that as our name because we believe that language justice is something to celebrate and should be a joyful practice.
Oh, wow. Thank you. So, yeah, it's kind of obvious when you think about it that language touches every part of your life. And whether or not you can interact with people to sort of achieve your goals or just enjoy living, you know, and to have that taken away from you, or to be sort of divorced from your culture in a way, if it was taken away from you, I don't have that experience necessarily, but like I can imagine that can be very troubling to people, especially as they're trying to navigate the world and navigate their lives, and especially if they're moving to a new place or if they're in a community where they can't speak to others. So.
We find that many people lose their language because the parents get to the United States, they cannot speak the language. They want their kids to be able to speak the language. So then they deny their ancestral tongue, and they get the kids to speak English. You guys can do it. You guys can do this. And then it's like eliminating a part of your identity, a part that's so important and so
Hmm.
much of your culture, and everything is ingrained in language.
But we
Yeah.
understand why that happens, right? Because it's so difficult to navigate a world in which
Hmm.
um, your language is not dominant and you're not understood.
Yeah. Actually, you made me think of something. When I was a kid, I wanted to take Italian in high school because that was like an option, and my parents were like, "Don't bother." I'm from an Italian American family, so I didn't even think about that because, like, like grandparents off the boat, and like they were just like, "No, don't bother." So it's a connection. I really don't connect with that part of myself. So, I never thought about that.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So,
Um, so then when we go to the small business community,
right.
a lot of merchants have been able to start little businesses in their communities. Eggleston is jam packed with businesses owned by the Latinx community
Right.
members, and there's also some Vietnamese, some Cantonese, and it's really sad that they cannot really communicate with other people outside their communities, and that they cannot reach a lot of the programs that the city has to offer for them. Uh, I understand that the city of Boston does an amazing job in translating the pages on their government website,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes to the actual programming, uh, they had an amazing program for small business tenants,
Mm-hmm.
but most of our small merchants could not attend because it was only held in English. There was
Oh,
interpretation provided.
well,
Uh,
and I'm sure it had a lot of valuable information, and then that would have benefited the folks in Egleston and other communities where there is a translation need.
yes, it's a huge need. Even navigating some of the COVID relief fund help that was available for the tenants. Most of our community was not even aware that they could apply for unemployment benefits if you were a private contractor or a small business or a sole employer.
Really?
Yes,
Oh,
we had
wow.
to go out and let people know. Listen,
Okay.
you're out of work, but you can apply for unemployment now. No, because I'm a small business owner and I don't. Yes, you can. This is what the CARES Act does. So, it adds to a lot of other things that they hit me. I feel very passionately about my people not being able to get all the information out there, to be able to understand the world in which they're living. And
Mm.
I imagine you've have you ever tried to watch a foreign language film?
Yes,
Yes. If you don't have subtitles, you're completely lost.
it's so true. So, what do you think are steps we could take as like for example, like maybe BPL or maybe the city could take to be better prepared to deliver services in other languages? Like, I understand it's not enough just to have services on or just translating your website, but what are other things that we should be thinking about when we or how we integrate language justice into our services, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think the first step is to evaluate who is in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you know what languages you need, then you can start building it into your programming. I know that the Egleston Library was starting a bilingual story hour before the pandemic hit.
Right.
Um, so that was great. So I know that programming does happen, but making sure that it's not an afterthought and trying to make sure that it's not language justice would be making sure that it's not separate programming, but that all the programming is accessible to all the people.
Ah, yes. So like when you're promoting stuff or you're promoting programming like that, how do you make it not seem separate? Do you know what I mean? Because like I think there's a tendency like we'll just make a flyer in Spanish. You know what I mean? How do you make it feel integrated?
Absolutely. So, one way to make it feel integrated is to just make sure that English is not the dominant language and that US culture is not the dominant culture in all of the programming presented. So, celebrating different cultures, highlighting artists in the community
Mm-hmm.
from different backgrounds, and making sure that other languages are presented first. Maybe the flyer is originally in Spanish and then it gets translated into English. Maybe an
Ah.
event is happening in Vietnamese and there's an interpreter in English for English speakers to attend.
Oh, interesting. Sort of flipping the script. I would have never thought of that. And then I like the idea of not making sure that the U.S. culture is not the dominant culture because I definitely walk around and not that I accept it as the default, but I don't question it. And I think maybe exposing people sort of to that different mindset will get them to think sort of differently about language justice because,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely, Amber, because the many people have never experienced being in a space where English is not dominant.
Mm-hmm.
So by having an event in a different language, it really builds empathy and not, acknowledgement of what other people are experiencing day to day. And building that awareness is what gets people working toward language justice. Often you have to experience something firsthand before you really understand what it feels like.
Right. Um,
So we always recommend having a cultural aspect of one of the other cultures represented at the meeting
mm-hmm.
to be either the beginning, that dedication or that moment of grounding. Let's have a grounding from a Native American culture. Let's have a grounding in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a song in a different language, just to set the tone and set the atmosphere for a multilingual space.
Oh, yeah. So I think it's just something, it's easy for people, I think, in Boston, or it should be easier for people in metropolitan areas to sort of end up in those spaces. But it's sort of funny that it just doesn't happen that way unless you already have the connection to the community. But I imagine that it would be much more difficult for folks living in like more suburban or rural areas to get that kind of exposure.
Sure. And that's why it really, we say that language justice is everyone's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really falls on the shoulders of who's organizing the event and does that person know who's in their community. So that's really the first step, is just knowing who are you in community with and who has been excluded in the community inadvertently.
How do you reach out to people, especially if there is a language barrier? That's something like that I struggle with because like is it finding a partner that already speaks to that particular organ or community and folks who speak that language, or is it just like literally walking up and just being like, hey, I know you're here? Like how do you approach that?
I think both ways. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I think it's important to start with a needs assessment. Who is in this neighborhood and what are their needs, and then building the programming to meet those needs.
Okay, so what would go into that needs assessment besides just being like, okay, there's Creole people in this neighborhood, you know, like let's say I am a small business and I'm looking to help someone, or let's say I am a librarian and I'm looking to do some programming, um, or I work in a nonprofit and I'm trying to make sure that I'm that my logic model or theory of change is actually achieving the goal that it set out to. How am I making sure that my needs assessment actually is meeting the needs and not my what I think they need? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, definitely. Margo, do you want to speak on the surveys that Egleston Main Street did and the phone banking?
Yes. So Egleston Square has a directory of all the businesses in the community. And one of the main questions is, what is the language of choice that you speak? What is the language that you and your employees speak amongst yourself? What is the language that your customers speak?
Mm-hmm.
Because this gives us an idea of what languages should be mentioned and what languages should be approached. Mutual Aid Jamaica Plain, for instance, they asked members of the community to join, especially if you spoke another language in the community, so that we could help everyone, not just those people who spoke English and understood English.
Mm-hmm.
So we had volunteers calling members of the community who did not speak the language. And we had members of the community invited to call in their language, and then had volunteers contact them back in that language. We also had a beautiful experience at a meeting where we asked folks to introduce themselves in their language.
Nice.
And we discovered so many people that you always listen to them speaking in English who were not really English speakers. You know, they were speaking Creole, and they were speaking Cantonese, and they were speaking Portuguese. And it was just lovely to see everyone and how comfortable they feel when they can speak in their language and they can introduce themselves in their language. Because we always have to bow down to the dominant language. We always have to attempt to speak English. It's like your parents told you, oh, don't bother with Italian, just learn English and communicate in English. Because that was the idea behind the melting pot. Okay, everyone becoming the same. And you lose so much when you do that.
Huh. You always hear the melting pot as sort of a positive thing. And it's funny because like it ends up stripping people of their heritage and their sense of community in a way. Huh.
Yeah.
I like it when it's described as a salad and you're tossing all of these different ingredients together, but they're still maintaining their individual characteristics.
Oh, that's cute. I like that.
But going back to your question, Amber, so direct outreach is the best way.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, of course, we can't knock on doors, but knocking on doors, when I taught in Holyoke and we were opening a school in the neighborhood, the executive director and the principal wanted to make sure that they were meeting the needs of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the new staff members, we took turns knocking on every door in the neighborhood, asking families what it was that they were looking for in a school.
Oh, wow. That's very time intensive. And I can see where people will try to find a shortcut not to engage in that way. There is no shortcut, though.
Yes, but there are no shortcuts.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit? So actually, we get a couple of people saying hello in the chat, but I was gonna ask just a little bit like how you just decided like, oh, translation's really where I want to go, and I want to help facilitate folks. I just wanted to sort of go back into your small business journey a little bit, just because we might have folks out there who when they watch this on playback, or maybe someone watching live is thinking about sort of contributing to this, and sort of what you should think about if you were to start a business like this, or if you were to work for a business like this, doing translation.
I was a translator many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I went into teaching because that's a true passion that I had. And when I started teaching here in the U.S., I realized that we were not reaching out to the parents of so many of the kids, um, or we were using dreadful translations that were not like real.
Oh, yeah.
And I started doing it as a help for the community. I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted the parents to understand what was going on in their children's school. I wanted to be there for the kids. So that's how I started doing it. Because just it, if you haven't been trained in interpreting or translation, you can still help. You can
Mm-hmm.
still do it. But there was nobody in the school who could really write in Spanish and communicate with the kids in that way, or it hadn't occurred to them that that's something they could be doing. So they were just relying on Google Translate to send out a letter to parents, or
Ooh.
and it wasn't working. So it basically started like that. I started doing that, and then once we moved over to Boston, it was like we saw that the need was rising, and we just we started doing it. We just really enjoy it. We are very lucky to be fully bilingual,
Mm-hmm.
um, and we wanted to spread that joy to other people.
Mm-hmm.
In the process, we've made amazing interpreters in other languages and in our own language, and we've created a community of interpreters who want to really help out and really, you know, get everybody to be able to communicate in the language they're most comfortable in. It's because sometimes you just can't find the words in that second or third language.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. So it kind of grew organically, is what you're saying. It came from passion, and then you just went full force right into it.
Yeah, it's serendipitous when passion and need collide. I think for me, it really came to a point when we were teaching right after Hurricane Maria,
Mm-hmm.
and we were getting an influx of Puerto Rican and Dominican students. And there was just a lot more need for language justice in the school than the schools could keep up with.
Ah.
And, often it falls on children to interpret for their parents. And that's just not, it's not a fair burden to place on a child.
No, it's not. Yeah, I can't imagine being in that setting, but it happens to a lot of kids. I remember some of the kids that I grew up with where they were in that position. So, you know, I can't imagine just doing that for my parents. And then you sort of, especially if you're a child in that situation, you must feel so alone in that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yes. And they would flock to the teachers who could communicate with them in their language, and
Mm.
it's just yes.
So going back to sort of small business, Egleston has a large Spanish-speaking community. When we're doing like translation and language justice, um, like how do we best support small businesses where English is not their preferred language or first language, um, um, without, I don't know, being patronizing? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Oh, Egleston Square merchant meetings are the best example of language justice.
Okay.
Because everyone really, when we could all be there, everyone had a headset. Whether you were monolingual English or monolingual Spanish, you all had a headset. And everyone really spoke in the language that they felt most comfortable in. And we as interpreters would just be speaking to the other language.
Okay.
Yes, the director, Denise Delgado, does a really great job at creating a truly bilingual space. And I think that that's what's needed to make people not feel patronized and to honor the wisdom that they're bringing in whatever language they're bringing it in. So that is best practice when we're able to meet in person, that everybody receives interpretation, because the language being spoken can switch at any time depending on the participant's comfort level.
Right. So we spoke a little bit earlier this morning before the stream about the Antenna Collective. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. The Antenna Collective is a collective of interpreters based in Los Angeles, and they've been in the community for a long time, and they've done a really amazing job at compiling resources for other interpreters to use. And so we shared a checklist that they have for if you're getting started in building a multilingual space, how to do that, and concrete steps that you can take.
That's great. I've just shared that in the chat so people will have access to that. And I have it up on the screen so folks can see. So it gives a different kinds of a language transfer, which like I guess I never thought about, because there is like simulcast text translation, but I didn't even think about consecutive, like the difference between what it means to be consecutive interpretation or doing simultaneous interpretation. Is there a better? Which one's better, or does it matter? Does it matter based on the format?
Yes, it matters based on the format. So simultaneous is more fluid because the languages are all being spoken concurrently and there's no interruption. Consecutive, on the other hand, allows languages to all take up the same amount of space and time. So, it depends. There's benefits to both.
Okay. Sure. What would you think is not the minimum, but like where should people start?
People should start by making sure that there are interpreters available.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How would one go about finding interpreters? Is there just like a page, or do I just like Google Vietnamese interpretation and then go from there? You know what I mean? Like,
yes. So Boston had an interpreters collective. It's not very active right now. Mm-hmm. That was one way. It's a lot of word of mouth. Honestly, there are many interpreters in Boston though, and I guess we could also be a resource because we're connected to interpreters in different languages now as well.
Okay. So let's see. Just checking the chat. So I don't see any questions in there, but I was just gonna say, let's see if there's anything you wanted to highlight that we haven't covered today. Let's see. So,
well, going back to the videos that, let's say that Boston gives an amazing presentation like the one on business tenant rights.
Right.
And it was only held in English, mm-hmm. but they put up the video in their website. I would suggest that video have subtitles.
Oh.
If there's not a better option, subtitles work, and then people could be able to read the recording in their native language and learn so much. So yeah, we need to explore all the ways in which making things multilingual for everyone.
What would you recommend for adding subtitles? I'm thinking of this now because I'm realizing like I'm having this conversation. It has a particular audience. But if, for example, I did want other people to be able to read and understand this, like what would be the best? Is this like a service? Is it Google Translate? Probably not. It's never Google Translate.
It's never Google Translate. There are services available. Margo, do you know the name of the one we used before?
Unfortunately, I do not, but most people who work in audiovisual can and have a subtitle program can do the work with a translator. I know we did it, but what we were sent the videos in English with the subtitles sort of in place. And what we did was just edit and write it in Spanish.
Oh, okay.
But the program was already sent to us as a link, like a Zoom link.
Okay.
But yes, most people who work in audiovisual have the capacity to add subtitles.
You know what I think it might actually be? It might be something like if you're using like Adobe Premiere, it might be a plugin. But I was going to say like, so you would need to get a transcript essentially first of what, there's the step that I was.
Or the translator can do that work directly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It depends on what they do. We've done it both ways.
Oh, see, I don't know this about like translation. So like, I know Margo and I spoke like last month sort of about like that you guys do the live Zoom interpretation, but like I didn't realize that was part of the work. So it's really easy. There's people out there who do this. So there
are people out there. Yes.
Yeah.
All of the resources are in our community. It's just a matter of finding them and utilizing them.
All right. So, oh, someone just made a comment. Oh, it's smart to add subtitles to videos. Yes. I know I watch a lot of media with subtitles. But yeah. Huh. I actually kind of prefer subtitles in a way because like I think you miss certain things if something's just straight up dubbed. You know what I mean? Like there's like a tone and intonation. I just watch like a lot of foreign media in general. But for like a business media or a business meeting, either conducting it live in the language for a specific audience or doing subtitles would probably be preferable. I mean, obviously the live one would be preferable, but you wouldn't dub over anything, would you?
No.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't quite sure what the limits are and what's appropriate. So
we were part of a bilingual presentation in Egleston Square where they did a video and they interviewed different members of the merchant community. And some would speak in Spanish and some would speak in English. And then we wrote the transcript in both English and Spanish so that you could be listening or reading whatever language you needed as the different people changed on screen.
Oh, that's helpful. And like going back to this Antenna Collective document, that requires just a lot of planning beforehand to make sure that is accessible to folks. Why do you think that the planning doesn't get done? I'm just curious.
I think often it's just not on people's radar to make their events accessible. It's the same with ASL interpretation, right? Like it's just it should be standard, but it's not. So just putting it on people's radar that when you're planning an event, how can you reach the most amount of people?
Okay. So, do you have any advice for people who are just like any resources or anything, like if they wanted to learn more about language justice, like is there a podcast, a website, or should they just you know, you don't want to go down the Google rabbit hole and get some like weird stuff, but like, are there good organizations? We talked about the Antenna Collective a little bit, but are there other organizations or resources people can use to educate themselves about language justice and what that means?
Honestly, I would start with Antenna because they have a list of resources that you can go more deeply into. They've put a lot of work and time into compiling those resources already, so you wouldn't have to start from scratch.
Oh, nice. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it up if I can spell collective. So is it antenna.works? Or is it the Antenna Collective? Oh, let me do Antenna Collective LA. There we go. I was getting some weird like tech thing. Okay. So we'll just pull up the language justice links. Okay. Cool. So what I will do is I will actually put this in the chat so people have access to it and they can go browse it later if they wanted to learn. Are there any local resources? Is it just like we should just attend like meetings or meetups online, that sort of thing?
A lot of our local organizations practice language justice. So if you attend the community meeting, it is likely that you will meet interpreters there and be able to learn more. But Matahari is a local organization that is starting a language justice fellowship. So that might be something to look into if you're interested in training as an interpreter.
Mapahari?
Mm-hmm.
M-A-P-P-A?
Put it in the chat.
Sorry?
I'll share it in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, she stole the words out of my mouth. Anybody who is bilingual in any two languages, it would be great if you could apply for this fellowship and be trained as an interpreter.
Ah, okay. So, Matahari, Boston. Okay. Oh, Matahari Women's Workers Center. Okay. I'm pulling that up. And I'm also going to put this in the stream so people can get so if people wanted to follow up on that, they can do that as well. So I have pulled that up. Oh, I think Matahari. What I'm hearing, what I remember is Matahari was like a spy, but I'm sure they're using the let's see. Matahari is a Greater Boston where women of color, immigrant women, and families come together as sisters, workers, and survivors to make improvements in ourselves and society. Oh, I like this. I'm definitely going to do some digging after this.
Their Language Justice Fellowship program begins in November, so.
Oh, that's exciting to hear. I think so often, like, so I'm effectively monolingual. I know some Spanish because I took it like 20 years ago in high school. But if someone wanted to become proficient in a language to be able to sort of operate in the communities where they are trying to help, what's the best way about going that? Just taking classes and just practicing the language, or or should we try to speak in English? What's the it's weird because like I'm monolingual and I just don't know how to approach and just making sure that when I do have an event, I do incorporate the planning to make sure that the resources are there.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage everyone to take classes. Mm-hmm. And especially if you can take classes directly from, instead of through a school, from someone and do a language exchange. I think that's the most beautiful way, where you're simultaneously teaching someone English as they teach you their language.
Oh, I never would have even thought about that. And actually, I bet there's probably more time for doing it. It probably can happen over Zoom.
Yes. Also, the younger the better. Little kids should be exposed to multiple languages. Um, the more sounds a child has been able to hear before the age of 7, the more languages they'll be able to speak, because their vocal cords will be able to pronounce so many different sounds. Our vocal cords lock in when we're 7, so that's why there are so many strong accents later on in life, because people don't have the ability to make the sounds. So exposing the kids to these sounds before they're 7 will help their vocal cords open up to be able to pronounce them more. So yeah, the younger the better, the more exposed the better. Um, a lot of foreign language movies, a lot of foreign language TV. Uh, there are a million ways to get started on language.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I remember my dad telling me that my grandmother basically learned by watching like soap operas in the 50s. Like that's how she learned English. And then like going they would have the English mass. And I think that's like how she learned English. But like um I never would have thought about using foreign language media to also enhance my studies. It seems so obvious, but like a language exchange is pretty cool too, huh? Sorry, you give me a lot of food for thought this morning. you know, so um, what do you foresee now that we are sort of forced to be more connected now with everything that's going on, and we'll be sort of forced to be remote? What do you think now is a better time for implementation of language justice? And what do you think what happens when we go back to whatever normal there is? Do you think that like we have a better shot for incorporation of language justice now, or in the future when we're able to connect?
I think definitely in the future when we're able to connect, because technology access is a barrier.
Yeah.
And true language justice requires everyone to be able to participate fully, and that's not as possible online.
Yeah. It's true. There are gaps, especially in Boston. There are gaps in connectivity in a lot of communities, and I suppose they do kind of overlap a little bit with folks who may not have English as their first language, or even immigrant communities. So that's a shame. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was like, oh, this is great. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
However, I do want to say that's not just because we are online and there are barriers to technology access does not mean it's an excuse to put off practicing language justice for the future.
Of course.
There are definitely steps that can be taken right now.
Okay. So following what the Antenna Collective has listed in that nice Google document is one way of incorporating language justice into your practices. Are there any other things we should be considering in terms of like kinds of programming or kinds of services, or even just like training? What kind of training should employers be giving to their employees to help them better facilitate language justice in their communities that they operate in?
I think representation becomes the most important, making sure that it's not just that existing employees are receiving training, but that the employees represent the community.
Also true.
And then letting them guide what they think their community needs.
Okay. So I'm just
Encouraging
thinking.
people to speak in their preferred language is also very important. Like,
Okay.
if if an employee's preferred language is Creole and a client comes in who speaks Creole as their preferred language, uh, they should be allowed to communicate in that language. And unfortunately, we see that some companies will not allow it. Their employees have to speak English no matter what, and that's one of the things we need to address.
And then making sure that employees who are bilingual or multilingual are being compensated for work that they are doing in other languages as well, because it is extra labor. And I know I teach for Grub Street, and Grub Street always makes sure that they compensate extra if I'm doing a class in Spanish or creating a bilingual space. And that's really important.
Okay.
Same thing for flight attendants. When they speak in different languages on their flights, they get extra pay for that. So there should be compensation for that.
Is there not compensation? You keep saying, so I'm assuming that that work. Well, I already know the answer to this. Actually, it seems as though sometimes where I've come across it, it's valued but not valued. Do you know what I mean? Where it's just like, oh yeah, we have someone who speaks Spanish on staff, but it's just like it's our Spanish speaking employee, and like I don't want to use like tokenism, but like I feel like sometimes it does happen where it's just like, oh, that's so and so, they handle that. So when I'm thinking about language justice, I just don't want to be like, oh, well, that's that person's bag because they speak the language. And I think people might even fall into that trap, even when they have conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, like where it's just like, oh, it's their thing because they're the diverse people. It's sort of funny. Yeah. How do you call people out, I guess, or not call people out, but help educate your fellow colleagues and people in your community in a way that's helpful, that they know that it's their responsibility to seek out language justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts?
I think speaking up is the best way to be an ally to language justice and say like, hey, I've noticed that whenever we have a Spanish speaking customer, we always send them to so-and-so. Is so-and-so being compensated for this extra work? And because so that it's not falling on the shoulders of the person to do all of the advocacy for themselves as well.
Right. Because I think okay, I have construction going on in my building. Cool. Just heard a drill go off. The perils of working from home. I hope that didn't get on the YouTube feed. Or they just shut off the water. I'm not sure. Sorry. I just heard this like crazy noise. Let's see. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that, but that's true. I always worry about that, and like sometimes when I just don't want to be like, here's another burden for you, person of color, to be the person of color in the workspace, to be the person, to be the one who does all this work. And so it's just one of those things of being cognizant and being supportive of their skills, their talents, and their value, and not sort of over relying on them. And making sure that when you do use their skills, that you compensate them, yes, with money, but also I think too, like just like saying that you value their contribution, because I don't think sometimes people get the recognition. Like that's a wonderful service, and it should be ingrained in all services when you're dealing like in a retail footprint. And I know we try our best when we have staff who speak multiple languages to help patrons whose preferred language is not English. But I don't necessarily think that everybody gets the recognition or feels appreciated when their skills are used.
And just because somebody speaks the language doesn't mean that they feel comfortable playing the role of interpreter
That's what I
or
mean.
that they feel comfortable, having that expectation placed on them. So I think it's important to have that conversation explicitly. What are you willing and able to do? And if the person, isn't willing or able, making sure that that gets hired out.
Yeah. Okay. Let me check the stream and see if we have any other questions. So we just had someone agreed with a sentiment that one of us said. I don't have the timestamp, but then also someone also mentioned that they love watching Spanish language TV. We don't have any questions in the chat. So we have about 8 minutes left. And I didn't know if you guys had any just parting advice for people who are looking out there to incorporate language justice into their services and their business, or people who are looking to help out in their community. So I didn't know if you had any parting words for that.
My parting words would be to just try it. It can feel really intimidating. Mm-hmm. It can feel like there are a lot of steps and a lot of things that need to be in place to practice language justice perfectly, but we're not looking for perfect. It's a process. You can build it together with your community, responding to their needs, and get better over time. So if you're interested in building a more multilingual space, just start trying.
Okay. And then Margo, I don't know if you had any comments or.
I just would like everyone to be aware that language justice is something that plagues us. Linguism, racism, ableism, all the isms are very important, and we need to address them, and we need to look for all of these social justice issues that we need to work on, and language is one of them. We need to have people who do not speak English feel that they are not inferior, that they are not less, that it is not a bad thing. And that means changing the way we look at things and the way we present things. We need to let everyone know that just because we live in an English dominant world does not mean that we all have to speak English and we all have to communicate in English. It's not fair and it's not real.
It's true. English is not a prerequisite for being successful, no matter what people might try to tell you. I mean, in a certain sense, in a way, it is, but like knowing English and being really talented at something are mutually exclusive. I think just by having that English only mindset or English first mindset, you're definitely excluding a lot of people who can provide a lot of value, and it's a shame. And if people saw it that way, they would just know, like, yes, like we are one community and we should be making those efforts to communicate with each other. So I really wanted to thank you guys for chatting with me this morning about language justice and what it means to incorporate that into your small business or into any service offerings you have as a business. I really appreciate the time you took. I certainly learned a lot, and I have some links to go digging through after this morning. I'm just checking the chat, and I don't see any other questions. But I did want to mention to folks, we do have small business resources, and I just wanted to pull it up on the screen. If you're thinking about starting a small business, you can email us at ask@bpl.org. We also have, you can attend a small business mentorship session. And then we also have business research services. So if this is something you would like to, so if you are looking to start a small business or whatnot, we will do our best. And now I'm trying to think about what's the best way to incorporate language justice into some small business programs, because I bet there are a lot of micro entrepreneurs, especially who are not necessarily English speaking, that would benefit from a lot of the services that we do have. So, you gave me some food for thought, guys. But I have the information up on the screen for those of you who are interested. So next week next episode we'll be following another business journey, and you'll see that popping up on YouTube soon. And so we'll be talking with the Greystone Girls, and talk about their evolution and sort of how they turned an interesting sort of art project into a small business, and what that means, and getting comfortable with some interesting topics. So thank you so much, Margo and Vero. I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess have a great day.
Thank you so much, Amber.
Thank you, Amber, for having us here.
Sure. And I hope to have you back on again. So I'm hoping to have some repeat guests, and like maybe eventually at some point, if like everything's safe, it would be cool to have you guys actually, speak in person and have that and have these conversations with people on their terms.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye. Stay safe.
Yes, you too. Be well.